Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. Growing up, I always heard people use the phrase, "Be ye also ready." I heard preachers and pastors say it when they wanted to encourage or maybe scare those of us who were aspiring to preach. I heard other adults use it when as kids we'd be asked to do something in the service at the last minute that we really didn't have much time to prepare for. And then naturally, I heard other kids use it as well, as we just walked around literally repeating everything we heard everybody else say. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't until a few days ago that I actually realized it was one, a partial statement, and two, was actually in the Bible. I mean, I know I probably should have known that part before, but if I can be honest, I really haven't always been sure what exactly that meant. My initial reaction then and now is, but why? And also, can't you just give me advance notice so that I can be the amazing master planner that I am? Yeah, I was that kid. If you told me something, I almost always responded with, okay, but why? And if we're honest, I'm that adult too. I need answers, I need clarity, I need full understanding from the very beginning before I ever commit. Or at least that's what I tell myself. Because the reality is life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you're just told to be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. So we're just told to be ready, but the when and the why don't exactly follow that statement. You're just supposed to take heed, accept it, and remain faithful. So here we are, on this first Sunday of Advent, a time in which we anticipate and wait with expectation for the coming of Christ. We are invited to do this together, to take heed and accept the call to remain faithful while we wait. But before we do that, it's important to name that our waiting will not be easy or without some discomfort. You see, the reality is, just as we see in all four of the lectionary readings for this morning, this period of waiting comes to us in the midst of all that is already happening around us. Times of chaos and confusion, discomfort and uncertainty, pain and loss, destruction and despair, judgment and evil times. It sounds a lot like now, doesn't it? I mean, one only has to turn on the news and wait a couple of minutes before the headlines start to remind you of the painful world in which we live. But you know, it's also in reading these passages and paying attention to our present reality that hope begins to peek out from behind the window panes of life. Hope in the fact that we have Scripture right here to help guide us through those tough times. Hope in the fact that maybe if we just keep reading, there will be good news for us to hold on to. And so we accept that call to wait. Not to wait with discouraged spirits or lack of belief, but to wait with anticipation and expectation for the coming of Christ, a time when we know things really will be better than they are right now. And it's this spirit of anticipation and expectation that allows us to wrestle, to ask questions, to try and make sense of it, to look for that clarity so many of us need before we can fully commit. It's in that wrestling that we become free to ask those questions. What do we do while we wait? How do we wait responsibly? How might we best ready ourselves? What does it mean to wait in the midst of trying and turbulent times? What does it mean to be faithful while we wait? These are questions, my friends, that we can return to repeatedly throughout this Advent season, encouraged by the fact that on the other side of those questions, there is the promise of Christ's return. Our questions and our circumstances, our doubts and our worries, all that is happening in the world around us does not diminish or alter that promise. Christ is coming. And it's knowledge of that very promise that undergirds our ability to remain faithful, to continue to trust and believe in a God that is present with us in the waiting, and a Messiah that is coming again soon. So suddenly the thought of waiting doesn't feel so daunting. While waiting, we are simply called to remain faithful. And according to today's scripture passage, we do so by continuing to do what we are already doing. The truth is, we all have a routine that we follow, those things that we do daily, weekly, and monthly to keep us on track in life. And while we should never be so glued to the routine that we forget what it means to live, there is comfort in knowing that the return of Christ will happen in the midst of what we do on a regular basis. So perhaps the reference to the days of Noah was to remind each of us here today that being ready does not require us to stop what we are doing and to prepare for some event that we can't even predict. So for all of the master planners in our midst like myself, you can take a deep breath right here. Because being ready does not require excessive or unnecessary planning that brings about more stress than it does peace. Instead, we are being called to consider our routines, those things that we do regularly, and to make sure that in those routines, we are being faithful to God. Are we focusing on things that matter? Are we making time for prayer and devotion and time with God? Are we slowing down long enough to appreciate and value the life that we have been given and the blessing that it is to be here? Or are we so stuck on the routine and what needs to get done that we're missing God in the moments of life? Perhaps in these next few weeks of holiday planning, we will pause every now and then to consider those questions. We are being called to remain faithful. And here again, today's scripture passage encourages us to do so by considering our relationships. Each of us are in relationship to and with someone else, whether it is God, ourselves, or the people around us. And what if getting ready during this season of Advent is about being faithful to the relationships with which we have been entrusted, caring deeply for the well-being of ourselves and those around us, not taking one another for granted or becoming so caught up in comparing ourselves that we lose sight of the gift that we are. Being ready in this way might mean taking an inventory of those relationships in your life and asking yourself, am I being faithful to God? Are we being good stewards over our relationships as much as we are our resources? Are we making time for ourselves in the midst of being needed by everybody else? Are we sowing faith, hope, joy, and peace into those for whom we have been entrusted to care? Or will we find ourselves so busy during this Advent season, checking off to-do lists and getting ready, that we miss God in the opportunity to form and nurture meaningful relationships? We are being called to remain faithful. And hidden within the passage of scripture for this morning is another reminder to remain faithful by remembering the teachings of Christ and that call to be righteous. As we reflect on the words that Jesus shared with his disciples, we know that among them was the call to care for the least, the lost, and the forgotten, to be concerned about and compassionate towards those living at the margins, to turn our hearts and our attention toward joining God in creating a more just and equitable world for all of God's children. So perhaps our charge to keep awake and to be ready during the season of Advent also has to do with doing what is right, advocating for righteousness, speaking up about things that are wrong, joining God in the fight for justice. Being ready in this way might mean taking a personal inventory, a heart check, if you will, of our own commitment to righteousness and doing what is right, and then asking ourselves the question, are we being faithful? Are our hearts and ears attuned to the cries of justice? Are we getting involved in the things that suit and honor our neighbors, or are we only concerned with what suits ourselves? In fact, do we even know who our neighbors are? Are we committed to joining God in creating a more just and equitable society? You see, the truth is God is already present and active in this work. So maybe today God is challenging us to join in and get involved in the work that matters. The kind of work that starts in our hearts and then manifests in our actions. The kind of work that requires real commitment. And I know you might be sitting here thinking, geez, this sounds like a lot of work. Being ready and prepared sounds like yet another thing that I need to create a to-do list for, carve out time in my agenda to accomplish, and makes me a little nervous about messing it up. But here's the thing. None of these are things for us to simply do. They are postures of waiting for each of us to adopt, postures that grant us opportunity to imagine the season of Advent, a season we return to year after year after year with fresh possibility, creative faith, and renewed hope. This is an opportunity to do Advent a little differently this time around. So friends, it is true that Advent is a season when we are being called to wait. But it is also true that we are being called to remain faithful while we wait. To consider the ways in which faithfulness in God might be reflected in our routines, in our relationships, and in our commitment to righteousness. And the good news is we do not endure the season of Advent alone. No, instead we do so with one another and with a God who promises to always be with us. We do so with the promise in mind that Christ is coming again soon. And then we do it with a renewed sense of hope that calls us out of despair and discouragement about what we see around us and into partnership with a God already at work, inviting each of us along to imagine the better days that lie ahead. So this Advent, let us consider what it means to wait with faith and with hope, with anticipation and expectation for the coming of Christ, a time when we know things really will be better than they are right now. So together, may we heed that call, and may we consider what it means to be ye also ready. For the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. May it be so.